Okay, everybody, it's time to cover my top favorite or most useful whiskey books in many categories of whiskey. This is going to be a little bit of a long one because there are a lot of categories of whiskey, so grab a pen and buckle up. Okay, so whiskey in general, how it's made and how it's made differently around the world. There's two books I recommend. Lou Bryson's Tasting Whiskey. We'll revisit another Lou Bryson book in a second. This sets up how everything is made, as well as Whiskey Distilled by Heather Green. This book has a different cover now, and it's a more narrative, and both of these have just absolutely tons of information. Very useful for the person learning about the category for the first time, but doesn't really need to specify in bourbon or Scotch whiskey, etc. Speaking of American whiskey, actually I have four books I want to mention. Bourbon Empire by Reed Muir. This is the kind of narrative history of American whiskey. There is this Fred Minnick book, Bourbon, The Rise, Fall, and Rebirth of American Whiskey. As you can see, I've taken a lot of notes in this book, and I love the trivia and fun facts. Fred digs up more cues than other people on a lot of things, so his books are always interesting. But the most factual kind of person writing about whiskey is Michael Veitch. He is, I believe, a full-time whiskey historian. So he's always got like the real intel. They're like, actually, that might not be true kind of information. We always look out for his works. He's a very well-respected author. And then finally, one more. If moonshine is your jam, this book, I've never seen it get any love or attention, but it really deserves it, by author Jamie Joyce. This is a really excellent book that I was surprised to pull so much out of, given there's so much like hokey bad information in most books about moonshine around the world. Moving on to Scotch whiskey. Now, there are a lot of people who write a lot of books about Scotch whiskey, and it's kind of like, do we need it? But anyway, so I'm going to mention two authors' names to look for. Charles MacLean, known in the industry as Charlie MacLean. I do like his malt whiskey, The Complete Guide. This book sets up, talking about how Scotch whiskey is made, regionality, this different styles, and there's a bunch of brand info here as well. That'll get you most of where you want to be. And then we have a book by Dave Broom. Dave Broom has written probably 100 books by now on whiskey, gin, and other spirits categories. But this one, he's trying to give us a sense of place for Scotland and the whiskey and the people there. This one has beautiful portraits and images throughout of it, and it's really trying to bring you to Scotland to get the vibe of Scotch whiskey made there. I just wanted to mention, I just got this in the mail today, the World Atlas of Whiskey. This is the third edition, I believe, and Dave Broom has written the two other ones. This doesn't come out till November, and it'll be great. It's big and pictorial and has maps and things like that. I look forward to reading it. On to Canadian whiskey. Well, here's our guy, Davin de Kermo. Kergamo. He's the guy on Canadian whiskey. This is the also, I think, third edition of his book on Canadian whiskey. It's got everything you need to know, and it tells a lot of what's interesting about Canadian whiskey is how it got that way. Canadian whiskey is pretty unique compared to the other categories, and I love the job that he does in all of his work in that book. Moving to Irish whiskey. So most Irish whiskey, the stuff made at the Middleton Distillery and Jameson and Redbreast and stuff like that, that's called Irish single pot still whiskey for the most part, or it might be a blend of that with neutral spirit. And this giant book with really, unfortunately, too light font in it, that makes it really hard to read, but this is an excellent book beyond that. And then for the kind of the vibe of Ireland, this book by the Dead Rabbit bar team, surprisingly, it's not a ton on production of whiskey, but it's a tour of Ireland's distilleries and its pubs. And if I was going to go to Ireland and visit, this would be actually my guidebook that I would probably bring more than anything else. onto Japan. I really actually like this Japanese whiskey book by Brian Ashcraft. This is published by Tuttle. Tuttle is a publisher that specializes in Asian food and drink and craft books. So all of their stuff tends to be pretty interesting. And I do like this as far as a category introduction of Japanese whiskey. Japanese whiskey is a category that is changing very fast once everyone kind of figured out that most Japanese whiskey is distilled somewhere else and kind of passes through Japan. So they're addressing that in the laws and legislation and what's on the market. Dave Broom, once again, this is kind of a counterpiece to his A Sense of Place about Scottish whiskey. This is the way of whiskey, and it's the vibe and the people and everything about Japanese whiskey. So once again, Dave Broom delivers. And then finally, the last category to talk about is whiskey science and production. Here's that second Lou Bryson book I said I was going to mention. I love Whiskey Masterclass, lots of charts and graphs and how little production factors influence the final flavor of whiskey. It's a very good book. The Terroir of Whiskey. This is pretty much Rob Arnold's PhD thesis on studying terroir and whiskey. There's lots of charts and graphs and data and stuff in there. And then finally, one that is a ridiculously huge sized coffee table book, but is one of the most sciencey and awesome whiskey books I've ever seen, is Shots of Knowledge with Rob Arnold from the last book and another author. This book takes the process of photosynthesis from sunlight into plants storing energy and shows how plants build up energy, and then shows how the process of making whiskey breaks that down into the stuff that we like to drink. Like every page is one scientific or biological step of the process. Absolutely fascinating. So Shots of Knowledge. Maybe you want to see if there's a Kindle version of this so you don't have to have it taking up so much space. All right, cheers.